Hi, I'm Rolly Brown. This is a special curve flattening concert. It's meant to be, hey Burks, it's meant to be a tribute to my late friend and idol, Steve Mann. And I'm going to start off just by playing one of my favorite Steve Mann licks. This isn't even a tune, it's just a break he took in a Mose Allison tune that he used to play. I just want you to hear the essence of what I can capture of his style. So it goes like this. It goes. That was sloppier than I wish it was, but that's a little touch of Steve's genius. And I want to talk to you a little bit about him. We might run a little long today. I'm going to show you a couple pictures here. I'm getting real tech savvy. So this is what Steve looked like, kind of the height of his fame. There he's in the recording studio, and there's a portrait of him. And he came up in Southern California. Barry Melton, who was the lead guitarist for Country Joe and the Fish, said this about him. He said, "Steve challenged me and a generation of young guitarists from LA to be more than we were. Ry Cooder, Taj Mahal, John Fahey, and dozens of others. Steve Mann changed the way the guitar is played, and for that, we owe him an everlasting debt of gratitude." And around that time, when Steve was playing in Southern California, the noted jazz critic Leonard Feather wrote this. He said, when Steve, when he reaches back for songs from the Leroy Carr era, Mann gives the impression of having been born 30 years too late. If you were to record one of those tunes, add surface noise and play it back at 78 RPM, you would fool a lot of his listeners. So that's pretty high praise from an elite jazz critic, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more. What happened, though, was when Steve was in his mid-20s, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he kind of fell off the edge of the world and disappeared for most of us for many, many years. That was in the mid 60s, maybe late 60s. And he didn't resurface until a great harmonica player named Will Scarlett and a wonderful guitarist named Janet Smith got him up to Berkeley in 2003, which is where I met him. I had heard the legends and heard his tapes, and went out and got to spend a little time with Steve. I think I have a pic of me playing with him here. We got to do a concert together with 4 or 5 other performers, and it was one of the high points of my life, I'd have to say, in my career. There's another picture of Steve in the later years. That's him with Margot St. James. Now, Margot St. James was the originator of a thing called Coyote, Cast Off Your Old Tired Ethics, it stood for, which was the prostitutes union in San Francisco. And she was a friend of Steve's, which he was a wonderful guy and women loved him. But even when I met him, he was still schizophrenic, and he was on a cocktail of drugs, and I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but the miracle of his life was that he kind of went through these years, electroshock therapy, life in institutions, living on the street, and then he got kind of saved by Janet and Will, and he lived about 6 years of a really nice life, and I got to visit him a couple times and hang out with him, and he was a lovely guy, and his music is just unbelievable to me. Okay, that's the intro. Now, I'm going to start out with his 99-year blues, and all you have to do is listen. Well, I'm getting tired of sleeping in this low-down, lonesome prison cell. You know I would not be in this condition if it had not have been for a girl named Nell. Well, I walk the floor, I just can't eat a bite. She used to be my rider, but she just would not treat me right. Well, I look into the mirror, all I see is the blues staring into space. You know this cocaine and reefer, it just won't touch my weary case. And I asked that old jail keeper, I said, Governor, please take a few days off of my time. He said, you're lucky, long timer, you did not get that cold 99. Yes, I asked that jail keeper, said, Governor, please take a few days off my time. He said, you're lucky, long timer, that you did not get that lifetime. That's Prison Cell Blues by Steve Mann. I want to check in and see who's here. Mike Carr, and Steve Shapiro. Hi, Steve. And Deb and a lot of the regulars. Steve and Lita Shapiro, I met them at our friend Trist Longcore's house, and it turned out that they had known Steve and they had written an article about him a continent away. And there's a woman named Charlotte Cantrell who just contacted me, and she might be here or might not, but she went to high school with Steve, so she had found out about him and somehow gotten connected up with me. What a world. Okay, so we're going to keep moving right along here, because if not, I'll talk too much. So this one is a tune that was actually written by Dr. John Mac Rebenak, and Steve was the session guitarist on Dr. John's first album, Dr. John the Night Tripper. So you can see his name in there somewhere. So this is called The Letter. Now this morning I woke up to find a letter shoved under my door, and it said, now Daddy, I don't want to see you anymore, 'cause you're no good for nothing, and guys like you, they come a dime a dozen. And I'm tired of the way you do, so Daddy, I'm through with you. Now after I finished reading that letter, I began to feel a whole lot better when I snapped to the fact she never ever would be coming back. And worst of all, she was right about those things she wrote in that letter she left under my door this morning. She was right about those things she wrote. Now it don't take a lot of smarts to know that. It don't take a lot of smarts. It don't take a lot of smarts to know where she ain't ever, ever coming back. After I read that letter, I began to feel a whole lot better when I snapped to the fact she never ever would be coming back. And worst of all, she was right about those things she wrote in that letter she left under my door this morning. She was right about those things she wrote. The letter. So when I play Steve's stuff, it's not exactly the way Steve played it, partially because I can't. He was just too good. You got to recognize your limitations. And also, I played his stuff for so many years that it has metamorphosed, and sometimes I just get out of control. What can I tell you? So, but I try to get close to the feel of it. Here's what Elijah Wald wrote about Steve. And Elijah is really a fine guitar player himself, and also one of our great writers on the blues. He was the co-write with Dave Van Ronk on The Mayor of McDougal Street, and he's written books on Robert Johnson and others. So Elijah wrote, Steve Mann is one of the hippest and tastiest guitarists who ever walked the planet. Of all the young guitarists, here he's talking about the album Live at the Ash Grove, of all the young guitarists who turned to the blues tradition in the 1960s, none was more brilliant and innovative than Steve Mann. His few LPs are treasured rarities, but none was rarer or more treasured than this live recording, Live at the Ash Grove it was called, a performance that is as passionate and soulful as it is technically astonishing. Well said, Elijah. So, but Steve didn't only play blues, so he wrote a beautiful instrumental, which actually is the way most people heard of him, and it's called Holly, and I'll play that for you now. So that's Holly, again by Steve Mann. This is Steve Mann Appreciation Day for me. You know, a lot of guitarists had an influence on what I fell in love with musically, and it goes way back, starting with Peter, Paul, and Mary, and on to Bob Dylan, and then to Phil Ochs, and then to Bert Jansch, and then to Reverend Gary Davis, and Lightning Hopkins, and Blind Blake, and it goes on and on and on and on as the years. Pierre Ben Suzanne, and Lenny Breau, and George Van Epps, and but I don't think any of them touched me in quite the way that Steve did, and had as much of a day-to-day influence as what comes out of the guitar when I sit down to play it. So I'm going to do you one more Steve Mann tune here. And this one, I got to thank my friend Paul Sykes, who lives down near the Jersey Shore. He had an old tape of Steve that I had never heard. I'd heard some of the stuff on it, but this song was on it, and I'd never heard it before. And so I immediately got serious with it. And it's Steve does a really cool, very understated, but really beautiful chord movement in it that I just adore. I often think of this life that I live, and it's a wonder I ain't dead, with drinking and a gambling and staying out all night. I'm living in a fool's paradise. Now you know my mama told me, and my daddy said it right. He said, son, you're just gonna drop right out of sight, with your drinking and your gambling, staying out all night. You're living in a fool's paradise. And though I've learned my lesson, like all the fools I have met, I have seen some things in this world that I wish I could forget. Now my mama told me, my daddy told me to. They said someday, son, fate will catch up with you, with your drinking and your gambling, you staying out all night. You're living in a fool's paradise. And though I've learned my lessons, like all the fools I've met, I have seen things in this world that I'll remember to my dying breath. Yeah, my mama, she sat right down and cried. She said, child, you're just committing suicide if you keep drinking and a gambling, staying out all night. You're living in a fool's paradise. So that's it. We're living in a fool's paradise. Steve lived until 2009. He had a bunch of medical issues come up. He had an aneurysm, and he finally passed. And he was about 67 years old. And I was so privileged to get to meet him and hang with him a little bit. And I know my friend, I don't know if he's listening today, but Frank Fatuski, he went out there and met him even before that. I still haven't met Frank in person, but I heard about him from Steve and Janet, and then we've gotten to be friends on Facebook. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 10:30 with my usual kind of concert instead of this special one. And Alex is on here. I assume he might be playing Monday at 3:30. He might put that up there. I'll know by tomorrow, maybe, if he knows by then, and I'll tell you. Alex Bevan. And thank you all for tuning in. Let me take a quick look. Diane Holbrook, Bunny's always great to see you. Ann Mintz. Read Ann Mintz's comment. She says, Eric Franzen is another great guitarist. Eric Franzen told me once that his secret to great arrangements was to teach a song to Steve and then steal it back from him. That's says a lot. Stevie Coyle, did you know about Steve Mann? I don't know. Carol Pratt, Kenny's there. Lita, you made it in. Great. And Charlotte, you made it too. Great. Well, if anybody who tuned in late, you can always re-listen to the whole concert later if you can stand it. So stay safe, stay sane, and if you get cranky, take a nap. And I'll be tomorrow at 10:30. Alex maybe Monday at 3:30. Cozy and Charlie will be Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. And that's all the advertisement for today.